In previous videos, we have talked about the free rider problem in the provision of public goods, and we have shown that public goods are often underprovided or not provided at all. So that is the case when everyone decides only for their own benefit and maximizes their utility without any regard for others. And we have seen that a social planner, for example, a government, can actually intervene here and improve everyone's welfare by providing the public good and by taxing everyone. So by basically forcing everyone to contribute and providing that public good, we can solve that free rider problem. Now, does that mean that governments always have to intervene whenever there is a free rider problem? Not necessarily. There are some cases in which public goods can also be provided privately. And that obviously depends on the nature of the public good, but also, and perhaps more importantly, on the nature of the society or the group that will consume the public good and are potential contributors to it. So one big factor in how much people are going to contribute to it is social pressure. Right? So imagine you're in a group of friends and you want to purchase something together and you want to chip together. Throw a big party for someone and you want to chip together. So if obviously in the most basic economic model, everyone would have an incentive to free ride here. But because you're very good friends and your friends will probably no longer be your friends if you can contribute but choose not to, everyone may contribute. Okay, and so these are examples, or this is one example for where social pressure, or the more extreme form, a social stigma of not contributing, can actually be a powerful force towards the provision of a public good. Even though throwing a party may not be a public good in the strictest of senses, because you can always exclude people from it. But for the people who are in this club of friends, it's basically a club good, and it follows very similar rules and has very similar economic property. So it is actually possible that private providers may actually overcome the problem of non-excludability and actually provide the efficient amount. Now, there is a theoretical possibility over there, which is they may actually, private providers, if they know very well what people's willingness to pay is, because they know better than a government who benefits more from a public good and who doesn't, they may actually be able to charge prices that are close to Lindahl prices. So they can charge a bigger contribution to someone who they know will benefit a lot, and a less of a contribution to someone who they know will benefit less. Although to what extent this applies in practice is obviously questionable. So it's actually hard to come up with an example. But there are examples for privately provided public goods. So here is an example from New York City from Gruber's book, where in New York City in the 1980s, it was not this glamorous. So Manhattan was not this glamorous part of the city that it is today. At least many parts of it. So you can see a quote up here which says that the area around Times Square, which I guess most of you know, was dirty, dangerous, decrepit, and increasingly derelict. So this is obviously not what Times Square looks like today, but that was the situation in 1980. And now, how does a city usually deal with that? Well, it has obviously it has public services that are responsible for the upkeep and for the cleanliness of the streets and all the public spaces. But if that doesn't work, if that breaks down, it might actually be beneficial for the businesses to just get together and do that themselves, right? Because if you wait for the city council to actually provide these services, they may never do this. And even though it may not be your responsibility as a business, it's in your interest as a business to do that. But yet you have this problem of free riding. So if one business chooses to get some street sweepers in and clean all the streets, that benefits everyone, but it's hard to charge to charge others. So what they did was they founded what is called a business improvement district in 1992, and so a few businesses got together and said, okay, we are going to do this as long as 60% of all businesses contribute to it. And now, obviously, businesses are in a different relation to one another than people would be. But yet, they are neighbors, and there is obviously there's presumably some stigma attached to not contribute. So in the end, around 84% of firms actually contributed to this, and so they actually and what they also introduced here was that if 60% contribute, then they can levy fees to non-paying firms, so those who chose not to contribute in the first place. And obviously, there is a question about how this can be enforced and so on, and you can read in the book how they solve that. But the fact of the matter is that this incentive mechanism actually worked. And so then those firms privately provided a public good, because anyone who was in New York City, in Manhattan, and was wandering around could enjoy that without those firms being able to exclude them. Yet it was in the firm's best interest to pay for the upkeep of the public spaces themselves. Now, on a broader scale, there are two aspects of human behavior and of human decision making that also make you question the underlying assumptions of the simplest model of public goods provision. And so the simplest model is everyone decides very selfishly and just decides whatever is best for themselves. And then we have this free rider problem and we have under provision of the public good. But the question is, well, are people really that selfish? Right? So is it really that people in every situation just decide on whatever is best for them? And I hope everyone here who watches this will say, well, no, people are not that selfish, right? We are not selfish, completely selfish towards our family members, of our friends, or even just people from the same country or people we feel somehow connected to. And if that's the case, then obviously people will contribute differently to public goods compared to a world in which every person just decides on their own benefit and just maximizes their own utility without any regard for others. So there is lots of evidence in social psychology and also in behavioral economics, some of which I will present in a different video, which is that people are actually often quite altruistic. So this is typically done in lab experiments where people play so-called dictator games where they get a chunk of money and can decide how to split this between themselves and someone else. And if they were if it was in their own interest that they were deciding, then they would simply keep everything for themselves. And yet we see in those dictator games over and over again that people actually split to a certain extent with others. And what also a lot of lab experiments show is that the degree of altruism people exhibit depends very much on their social distance to others. Now, these slides have been made before COVID, And so the term social distance at the time had just one meaning, which is basically how well you know someone, right? And how close the social connection is to someone. And you can imagine that if we're talking about decisions that would affect maybe your own parents or your very close friends, you would decide more altruistically than then when you make a decision that where the other party is an anonymous person, a person that's not known to you in a market, for example, right? And so there is philosophers and social psychologists who study to what extent, for example, markets where many people interact without knowing one another have this ethical problem because they don't allow for the provision of public goods, and they don't allow for altruism, or basically people switch off their altruism as soon as they interact in a market, but they may be very altruistic in other scenarios. And this is to me is a very fascinating field of research, because this is obviously crucial if we want to understand human decision making. And this is something economists care about and care about a lot, but it's obviously not only economists that are working on this, but this is very much the territory that a lot of philosophers work on, social psychologists, behavioral scientists, and so on. Now, a second and related issue, but going more from the individual to a bigger group, is the concept of social capital, right? So different societies or different groups within societies value altruistic and communal behavior differently. So you have, when you think about, small villages where everyone knows everyone, or even, within bigger cities, you often have communities within neighborhoods that know each other very well, that interact on a regular basis. Or think about in churches, think about parishes that have a very strong sense of community, or sports clubs. You often have in these groups, or in these small societies, you have actually norms that are conducive to altruistic behavior. And so that's why you see in these groups that have a strong, where you can see there is a strong element of social cohesion, that people also voluntarily contribute a lot more time and money to the activities of that group than they otherwise would, right? And yeah, there are obviously also mechanisms of social control at play. Think about donations in a church where a basket is going around, and you can see exactly who puts in what if you pay attention. So there may be also some mechanisms that sort of keep these behaviors a little bit in check, or incentivize people to put something into the donation box because others can see that they do. But I guess we can agree that there are groups and societies that are more conducive to altruistic behavior, and as economists and sociologists call this, they have a greater level of social capital. So they trust one another more, and even if there is no formal guarantee of reciprocity, that if I contribute, that someone else will also contribute, and that I get something back, even without that, people contribute. And related to that is the concept of so-called warm glow, which is, on the one hand, people may be altruistic because whatever, to the extent that their actions affect others, they actually care about the utility of others. Okay? So if I do something for my children, that I do maybe out of not because I feel better, but simply because I really care how my children are doing in life. But there is also another aspect to people's decisions that has the same flavor of altruism, but it's not quite the same, which is warm glow, right? So I may simply feel good if I contribute to a public good. So if I donate to charity, I do not get anything back from that charity, but I know that I've done something good and I feel good about it. And so again, if you have in groups, if you have a lot of people whose decision or whose utility function, basically the way they decide on what to do, follows more a warm glow model or the combination of altruism and warm glow, we will see that they contribute a lot more to charities or to public goods, to clubs, to associations, parishes, and so on. And so that the difference to altruism here is that people whose behavior follows the warm glow model, uh, they don't just care about the amount of the public good, but they simply get some intrinsic benefit from that, from contributing. So what these few examples and concepts have shown you, hopefully, is that there is a lot more to studying public goods provision than just saying, okay, people are selfish, they free ride whenever they can. This does not mean that the free rider problem is completely gone in all societies. That I guess would be a very naive perspective, but that everyone all the time just decides on their own behalf and so maximizes utility very selfishly is probably also not true. And so what we have then in different societies is somewhere between those two extremes, the extremely selfish decision makers and the extremely altruistic decision makers. And we have to, the challenge for economists is then to study basically where a given group or society lies on that spectrum.